Hi there, it's a very interesting debate. I'm David Matthews from Times Higher Education. You mentioned that the Arab Spring is an enormous opportunity to kind of reform education in the MENA area. But can it be reformed effectively in those countries that haven't undergone revolutions, particularly the Gulf, where there is still a lack of democracy, a lack of academic freedom and so on? Or do those monarchies and emirs need to be overthrown or relinquish their powers considerably before you're able to properly reform the education system?
Thank you. Tara would like to answer this question?
I mean, this is an existential problem and a question that you're posing. Why don't autocratic regimes reform and address change and initiate change themselves, as opposed to wait for a groundswell of demand for that change, which can be destabilizing and can be violent? I think that is the heart of your question. It is not the case that in all experiences we've observed, and certainly around the world, that revolutionary change is the only way or the only route to achieve comprehensive agendas for modernization, for economic development, for prosperity, and for a host of things. In fact, you can, in some cases, look to a lot of autocratic regimes that had the vision, had the necessary focus, devoted the resources. I think in the Gulf countries, on account of what happened in the non-Gulf countries, the expectations and the incentives ought to now be lined up so that youth-driven agendas, including that of education reform and employment and an involvement in society, whether it's housing or family formation, are going to be key priority areas of focus for most policymakers. Would this be sufficient to make these agendas have traction for them to actually create and realize sustainable outcomes on the ground? I don't know. But surely at this moment, one can only view the dynamics in the region that start with revolutions driven by youth, high expectations, ambitious demands for change and reform. And if I happen to be an autocrat, I would be thinking of how to take this agenda, take the initiative within it, and make things happen.
I would like to comment, David, that you brought, since you're going to be here for next, hopefully 3 days, I encourage you to look at the reforms that are taking place in Qatar and some of the Gulf states. It's a major reform in education, either K-12 or higher education.
Just to add one little comment on this. I mean, in the GCC, some of the GCC countries, like in Saudi Arabia, they are leading the way in terms of private sector participation, and some powerful foundation and NGOs like Abdul Latif Jameel Bab Rizq, which is empowering the youth in Saudi Arabia to become more entrepreneur and to create their own ventures. So the GCC countries in some ways are also leading the way for the involvement of the society and the private sector in contributing to the solution of unemployment in the region.
Okay. Number 4, please.
Hello. This is Professor Alimullah Mia, Vice Chancellor of International University of Business, Agriculture and Technology from Bangladesh. On the first issue of the vocational education, when I came to the first OIS conference, I visited some of the educational institutions here in Qatar and also in another correction in Bahrain, including the Northern College, where we discussed about the vocational education issue. The issue is not immune. Even in Bangladesh, we have a problem. But given the resources available, the social acceptance of this vocational education can be substantially increased. If you look at the Singapore model, where they institutionalize vocational education within the general frame of education and has made it extremely successful and popular. So there is no shortage of resources. If we take that, in Bangladesh we cannot do it because we have tremendous shortage of resources. Coming back to the other issue in terms of the mismatch between the labor market and the education process, could we not look at really seriously in terms of the labor migration issue in the area? Intra-Arab migration as to what are the skill migrations taking place, and then external migration within the Arab region from this country. I've done some study in this area. It is a very clear issue that it is not just on a skill migration. There is a high level of professional skill migration within the region, which can easily bring out what I call the market gaps in terms of the educational provider, youth expectations, and the preferred references. And those indexes can clearly lead to both educational reform and youth choices. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take another question. Number 3, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dr. Abdul Wahid Khan. I'm president of a business university in Bahrain. I agree with the diagnostics of the panelists that the major problems are relevance to the existing educational system, and also the delivery mechanism is the one that you have been very critical of. The question is, this summit is about innovative education, innovation and creativity in education. But if you look at the policies, yes, I agree that the Arab Spring creates an opportunity for reforms in education, but if the mindset of the policymakers doesn't change, that if you don't accept, for example, technology-enhanced learning as an alternate method of enhancing access, improving quality, and reducing the cost, then we will not get anywhere, and whether opportunities are created or not, whether we will capitalize on these opportunities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anybody want to comment on these 2 questions?
The first one was more like an observation and comment rather than a question, and I agree with the gentleman that much could be learned from the experiences of other countries like Bangladesh. And the issue of vocational training, of course, much of it relates to social values and norms, and that has to be tackled by institutions and by policymakers through various means. It's not going to be an easy job, but there are also examples that could be sort of taken into consideration. The next question from the gentleman from Bahrain about the policymakers and if they are rigid and unwilling to accept new policies and like introduction of technology and stuff, they could also be resistant to other reform initiatives. This is going to be, of course, a challenge. And it's something that we need creative ways of overcoming. Nobody said that education reform is an easy thing, particularly when it's comprehensive. There are successes and failures, and it's much depends on the kind of approach that those reformers follow.
Okay. Tariq?
Yeah, just very briefly, I hope we can avoid the fixation on the policymaker or the person at the top as the cornerstone of change and the initiator and the owner of that change. I think to the extent that we accept the premise that what we're trying to reform here are incentives and institutions, and that these institutions and incentives are rigid, inflexible, and that is the heart of the resistance to education reform in the Arab world, then the focus has to be on exactly those, whether they happen to be regulations or compensation and hiring practices. Those are the institutions in question. And at the moment, the only assumption one would like to make is that there is more of an interest and an openness and a desire to look for reform, even of deeply embedded expectations and norms that come out of these institutions. Very briefly, just on the question of vocational training and what Singapore did, and again, to sort of perhaps amend what I said, by thinking of education reform as a comprehensive agenda, by definition, this agenda encompasses not only our focus on education institutions, teachers and students and schools, but also on other aspects, other structures within the economy. If you don't fix your labor market, there isn't an amount of money you can throw at education or an amount of political capital that would fix the issues of skill mismatches, the denigration and the stigma associated with vocational training. Comprehensive reform in the education sphere is about labor market reform, is about schools and teachers, it's about dealing with families, it's a host of issues, including governance, accountability, and the involvement of the public in managing the education system.
Thank you. There is a question here on the Twitter from Saleh Safar Al-Ghamdi. He is asking the question is the similarity of cultures in the Arab world is an obstacle to the development of education, or political systems are the biggest obstacle? Or maybe both.
I don't see the culture as an obstacle to education. If you want to refer to the traditions, even from Islam, there is no obstacle to developing education. When it comes to political systems, you may have some obstacles there depending on the system, but as Dr. Tariq has just said, now we have really a golden opportunity for creating change, not just in the countries that are undergoing transformation, but also in the other countries which are trying to learn the lessons of the transformation going on in other countries.
I mean, just to add to this, when we did our survey for the publication of this report on education for employment, we surveyed some 1,500 youth and 1,500 employers. And the one thing that was clear, whether it is rich Saudi Arabia, one of the richest countries in the region, or poor country like Yemen, I mean, the whole region is facing very similar challenges when it comes to education, when it comes to the relevance of what people are trained on, the mismatch with the needs of the labor market, the delivery challenge. So whether it is the difference in political system, cultures, and is not a real obstacle.
I'll ask you another question, Salahuddin. You talked about the unemployment, and I think all of you, and even this morning session talked about, Her Highness said about 50 to 70 million are gonna come to the market in the next few years. How can we curb this unemployment increase in this region? I mean, among youth, how can we slow it down, or maybe change its direction? How can we do that? I mean, what other countries did to curb this, and we can follow suit?
I mean, I wish I know the answer, but I mean, to be practical, in the short term, we already have a high stock of people who are unemployed. People who have already graduated for the system are now and not finding a job. For these people, work readiness program is essential and critical. When I say work readiness program, is about repair and prepare. Repair in terms of providing people, I mean, this youth, and equipping them with the soft skills, with things that will make them more employable, and prepare them for the transition to the workplace. In the medium term is basically what Dr. Tariq and Dr. Mohammed they were talking about in terms of comprehensive reform of the whole education system, including the incentive, the institution, the participation of the private sector, and to have more dynamic labor markets.
Let's take another one or two questions. Number 3.
Hello, I'm Dr. Nirmal from Oman, and I'm really happy to tell you over here that in what I have seen in last 7 years, I'm basically from Bombay. So the way things have developed in Oman is really, really commendable. I mean, it's changing fast, and I have seen each generation, each year, the students are performing better. What I feel is somewhere there has to be a motivation, and if we make students over here ask questions, it is changing a lot. I mean, back in Bombay, I know all students always used to be coming up with so many questions, and here it doesn't happen. If the students are asking questions, they are trying to learn and enjoying learning somewhere around their teenage, and it can be taken further. I'm teaching at a medical college, so luckily I get the students who are already at better level. But if that is changing at school level, it will change a lot over here. So I don't know what and how we can start, but it has to be a collective preparation of the teachers to make students feel learning is something to be done for learning's sake and not for a diploma or degree alone.
Thank you. I think it's a whole culture. It's the family, the teachers, and everybody should be involved in it. Number one, please.
Hello. My name is Adnan Al-Amin from Lebanon, UNESCO consultant on higher education. I have two comments, please. First, I don't think that education reform or Arab Spring could be reduced to the problem of employment versus unemployment. This is a part of the issue. And even this issue is not only mismatching between two sectors. Maybe the problem in the labor market is bigger and more interesting to handle than the higher education system. So the second thing is that the education change is in fact related to what I call governance. Arab Spring is about political matter, is about rooted, is about moral matter, is against something despotism in the system. So if we go to university or higher education, the issue related to reform is regarding governance. Governance means that universities are not receiving orders from the minister and the president of the prime minister. And the faculty is not receiving orders from the dean and the dean from the president. So we will have another future of universities. Also, governance means participation of teachers, and governance means participation of students in the governance and the management of the higher education institution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adnan. Number two, please.
Hello. I want to throw my question to the panelists. I'm come from Sierra Leone in West Africa. I'm founder of Be Gifted. I was a bit shocked at the challenges that young people and youth face within the Arab Spring and the difficulties of employment regarding those who have achieved some bit of higher education. Drawing from experiences in Africa, there has been a little transformation in spite of challenges there. How can the institutions within the Arab Spring and the Arab states collaborate or seem to have some form of interaction with institutions in Africa so that there could be some kind of eye-opener to the different challenges that they face in remote communities and countries that are far removed, and how far cross-cultural education can be made possible to share experiences.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Number five, the last question comes from number five, please.
Hi, I'm Jumana Ode, and I'm a pediatrician working with children with special needs. And at the same time, I teach at medical school in Palestine. I believe that governments are supposed to invest more and pay more attention to education. I have some examples where my kids, 5, 6, 7 years old, were kicked out from several schools. Why? Because they ask questions. Democracy doesn't start with elections, electing your president. It's supposed to be when children are very little and they can say no to something that they disagree with. Another issue that already you've mentioned on how much money is paid for education in all Arab countries. If there are some successful examples here and there, it's just bits and pieces. It's not enough. Why, although you mentioned that there's no obstacle in culture, I question why. Yes, Islam starts with Iqra, but is that enough? Why we are still backward, Arabs and Arab countries? As another small observation, also that women or girls are excluded in many cultures for education. It's not a priority to educate, although Palestinians used to invest on their kids to educate them. Third point, that why
Last
our
point.
kids, if they are abroad, if they go to another system, they are respected and they can do well there. They are either average students in our system or below sometimes they fail, but they go to Europe or to the United States and they succeed. I have hundreds of examples of my kids. I mean, kids that I taught or they come to our center. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, before you answer, I have one more question coming from the online. Can we improve education without raising quality and stature of teachers and the teaching profession? Can we do that?
The answer is simple, no.
No.
I don't think so.
Okay,
All research shows that quality of education is strongly associated with teachers' quality.
But so the infrastructure, the top of the line equipment, the buildings.
Necessary but not sufficient.
So the teacher is the main element.
It's one of the main elements.
What other main elements you think we need to work hard on?
Governance, accountability.
Governance, accountability. And I'd like to comment, Salah Ad-Din?
Not on the teacher.
Or some of the questions?
Yeah, some of the question, maybe just a few comments. There was one comment about governments needed to spend more. Actually, governments in the region are already investing substantial amounts of their budget in education. But the challenge is on what this money needs to be spent and how it needs to be spent. And this is linked again to the governance in place. It's linked to the type of institution that we need to have and the incentive system that Dr. Tariq mentioned in the beginning. Girls' access, I don't think it's an issue anymore in most of the Arab countries, but the challenge is whether girls have access to, to continue education and equal opportunities post-graduation. I think that's the main challenge in the Arab region. I cannot agree more about the gentleman from Lebanon on the governance. Yes, the governance is the #1 priority, but what the Arab Spring has created, it has created an opportunity for this agenda that has been with us for the past decade to really find a way to become on top of the policymaker agenda hopefully in the coming decades. Again, this is a long-term engagement. This is not something that will be fixed overnight, but there is hope that we are now seeing some light at the end of the tunnel.
Before we have only 3 minutes left, I have one question for three of you, or for all of the three of you. And I state here that yet in every crisis, there is an opportunity. And youth and children are an asset. And the political challenges is to harness that asset through democratic reform and an agenda for education and employment. Do you gentlemen see a light at the end of the tunnel?
I'm optimistic by nature, and I think, yeah, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And what we see from the Arab Spring is a lot of surprisingly good output and indication that change is possible, and that people are seeking democracy, and the change that we are experiencing now is going to be a long term with ups and downs. But eventually there is light at the end of the tunnel. I believe that youth today, Arab youth, have a lot of potential to create and initiate and lead change.
Salah Ad-Din?
Absolutely. I mean,
optimistic too?
Very optimistic. What we have, the biggest asset of this region is its youth. And what we have seen over the past few months in terms of the youth drive, energy, commitment, and civilized way for the revolution, it's a very strong sign that we have a bright future in front of us.
Dr. Ibrahim, I think in the immediate term, short term, the next year or so, I'm measured. And I think everyone should manage their expectations and be realistic. But with a 5 to 10 year horizon, I'm extremely optimistic and hopeful. Just a year ago, I was part of a book that was produced, and the title of the book was about youth in the Arab world trying to summarize their condition, including the concept of waithood, which came out of this book. The title of that book was A Generation in Waiting. The assumption we all made was that the youth of the region were waiting for us to do something. A year later, we learned that they're very much capable of taking initiative and in fact defying the odds and bringing about profound change. And maybe that is exactly what's going to happen to education reform in the next 5 to 10 years.
The waiting line is not going to vanish, huh? It might be reduced, but it's not going to vanish in the next few years. If I asked you this question a year ago, I need just yes or no. Would you say yes or no? Would you be optimistic or pessimistic?
Less optimistic, but still optimistic.
Yeah, I would say the same.
Around the same time last year, I was depressed.
Okay. Okay. By these wonderful answers, I'd like to thank our panelist, Mr. Salahuddin Kadri. Sorry, I got the last name. Okay. And Dr. Muhammad Faour and Dr. Tariq, our colleagues. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. And I'd like to thank the audience for their patience, for their wonderful questions. Before we close this session, I just to remind you that our colleagues here at WISE say, discover the open program during the lunch break, WISE debates and WISE focus sessions in the auditoriums and in the WISE Majlis, demos and other activities in 5 areas of the WISE Majlis, workshops at the meeting rooms, and among today's highlights, speed networking sessions, WISE Majlis, Area 3 from 13:15 to 14:45, and WISE Focus 1.4, WISE Award 2011, the winners, and WISE Majlis Area number 2. And please return your translation headsets when leaving the room. Thank you, and have a good lunch.